Hi, everybody, and welcome to our Future by Design webinar series. Today, I have the pleasure of being able to do an interview in person with Karl Tlais, and we're talking about the future of humanity in the metaverse. Imagine waking up in the year 2042. What do you see? And what do you want to see? A Future by Design webinar series is about creating a vision of what the world will look like in the next 20 years. Now, Karl is a strategic business leader with over 20 years experience building market presence and driving revenue growth across Asia Pacific, Europe, Middle East, Africa, very global. He's recognized as an industry transformational leader across the digital economy, fintech, innovation, partnerships, ventures, and investment space. And Karl has developed a global and regional ecosystem of partnerships across a broad spectrum of industries in the government, enterprise, startup space. He's the founder of iAdvisory and a strategic advisor, board member of several organizations across the globe, pioneering the digital and data economy. He's co-chair of the Business Innovators community at the Capital Club Dubai and leads the digital economy, metaverse, AI and fintech initiatives. There's actually a lot more. I had to cut that bio down, just so you know. So it's such a pleasure to welcome you to our webinar series and also in person at Work Club in Sydney.
No better place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. It was actually interesting the way that we met, and I love Work Club, a partner of ours, and Karl is here from Dubai at the moment, and they've actually connected us to have a conversation. And I think we came up with a number of different connections and our ecosystems and partnerships, and we had the most fantastic conversation that we thought we have to have one online so that we can sort of share some of those thoughts with our audience.
Definitely.
So, Karl, I have to ask you, you've worked previously at some really big companies, Cisco, Microsoft, Visa. What has led you to be passionate about the metaverse and this topic?
I think the core ingredients actually arose through those organizations. When you start to think about where we're going and where we've been, I think it's always good to reflect. To me, it's always been a journey. So coming through over the last, I guess, 20 odd years, navigating through multiple pivots that have happened in multiple industries. And a lot of those sort of have been built upon, yes, the internet and built upon that foundation layer. But I went through, I guess, a learning journey through a lot of these different entities, whether it was core infrastructure on the network side, whether it was on the software side, and in the pivot into payments, all of that's become the core ingredient of the metaverse. And so as you start to see, where we're actually going is built upon fundamentals, but where we're actually heading is going to be quite unique because it's going to be shaped by everybody and anybody who's actually online. And that's the difference, really.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Incredible. So I love this conversation, and particularly as well, we connected. Our audience are investors, it's government, it's corporates, it's entrepreneurs, it's startups. There's a lot of people in our ecosystem, and the future of humanity in the metaverse really is everybody. And I'd love to start first. Today, we're going to talk about mindset, technology, and then impact of some of these technologies. And so in your opinion, over sort of the past to lead up till now, what has been the mindset? And then where do you see that going in the next 10 to 20 years?
Yeah, I think the way I look at it is, there's three core ingredients I think every one of us needs to have and possess. One of those is specifically around having an entrepreneurial mindset. And I think what I mean by that is you start to think about what's the similarity between a CEO and chairman of a large corporation, whether it be one of those big tech brands or any other entity, and the similarity between a co-founder or a startup founder. The link here is that they're constantly looking to hunt for new partnerships and new business and grow their business, but they're also accountable to shareholders and investors. So that entrepreneurial mindset is really important. I think the other shift is around, making sure that you're ready to embrace change. And there's two different things around having a change mindset, and I call it the change mindset. One is you can expect change, but then you've got to embrace it. And I think the core ingredient around embracing change is that as you see it coming, start to adapt and infuse your knowledge with what's coming. And I think that's really important. And I think the third ingredient in terms of a mindset shift, which is all around the individual and also the economy as we're pivoting, is having an innovation DNA. And I think the core ingredient with humans is that we actually are problem solvers. We solve problems, and we do that on multiple levels, whether we're waking up in the morning, to purchase some toothpaste because we run out of toothpaste, or whether it's to navigate to work or whatever other problem we're trying to solve. So having that innovation DNA is what distinguishes us from sort of the animal kingdom. But I think that's the kind of mindset shift you've got to possess and get ready for what's coming. And what's coming is coming through multiple channels. And I guess we'll have that dialogue today. But as you start to see what's on the horizon, having those three core, mindset attributes will get you ready for it.
Yeah. I love that you said problem, and I think the entrepreneurial mindset has been, whether it's at the government, corporate, startup, it's solving problems and what do humans need or what does the planet need. And so we started talking the other day about a digital twin of the planet as well as digital twins of people, and I'd love to delve into that a little bit more, because I've got this view as like actually all of the information of the earth, we can have a digital twin of the earth, similar to Jarvis in Iron Man, and that we have this physical layer as well as the digital layer, and then being able to utilize that information to solve more problems, which is great for business and governments. But then what does that mean for humans and humanity? Yeah. And your views on digital twins were very, very cool. So what do you?
Yeah, a lot. So I guess where I had the really deep thinking about this happened around May of last year. So I was actually chairing a dialogue on AI and its impact on society. And it was a live fireside chat at the Capital Club in Dubai. And it struck me was having a conversation with Singularity DAO's head of communications. And they were talking about Sophia, the robot, and the humanoid attributes that it had, and infusing it with algorithms. And I started to think, well, that's fantastic, because I think from a physical perspective, that's there. But what if we had a digital twin of ourselves, an avatar, which was infused with a mindset which we pre-configured? So it would carry our interests and our habits based on our interests. And it would do things for us while we were offline. And the concept here was, if I have 24 hours in a day, I have 8 hours to sleep. I've got 8 hours to, work. The remaining 8 hours split between socializing, eating, networking. You have a very limited time to actually go out there and start to learn new things. So you need to release aspects of that. So having a digital twin, which can contribute to my life in many forms. One is hopefully give me back time, because I don't need to be always physically online. The other part of that is, what is the economic opportunity that comes through that? And the economic opportunity is, today we're not really measuring the digital economy from economic productivity for me as an individual. And I think there are many attributes to that I think we can ascertain or achieve through an avatar digital twin, future digital twin provider for us. So, yeah.
So let me get practical on this for a little bit.
Yep.
I've got a Google spreadsheet because I am obsessed with data, and I've got 168 hours in my week, and I've allocated, I want to do X amount of hours for exercise, and this is how much sleep. And then I've actually scheduled that into my calendar. So I'm pretty OCD about this stuff.
Nice.
And I loved the Orcam. And so Orcam do the glasses for visually impaired, and they actually have this product called the MyMe, which they were going to go to market, which was more of a mass market product as opposed to for the visually impaired. And this camera would connect to my LinkedIn, and it would recognize people as they were approaching, and people in my network. It would buzz my iPhone or my watch and say, Karl's a couple of meters away, and here's some reminders that you've set for Karl when you see him next. And also then it had the ability in the back end of the app to categorize people as personal, business, community, and it would measure how much time you spent with your family versus business colleagues, and you could set goals. So I feel like some of these technologies exist that we're probably not utilizing as much as we will in the future. But what will be that transition, and what are some other technologies that you may have seen that will be getting us to that point?
I think we're in that hybrid phase, right? So right now, we're getting familiar with the Oculus, we're getting familiar with these new concepts around engagement in the physical presence. And I think the step is all around high fidelity and compute. So the quicker that comes in, which is happening now through multiple tech innovation that's sort of coming to the fore. We're seeing obviously with the Oculus evolution. It's really, I guess if you look at the sizes of the Oculus headsets, they've come down quite a lot, and that's also obviously because of the compute power that's now readily available. But if you start to think of the back end algorithmic shaping, so how we were mapping the AI sets that we want to predefine relative to user experiences that are coming, I think that's the map. And so we've learned a lot through gamification. We've learned a lot through what the kids are achieving right now with the likes of obviously Fortnite and Roblox and these sort of games. But you start to bring that experience in a high fidelity environment, and you start to see what's really the opportunity around that. I think today that's where the rubber meets the road. So if we can get that down to a level where it's not only highly immersive, but it's almost seamless in terms of the experience for me as a consumer, then my way of shaping that towards multiple industry experiences will become sort of the norm. So yeah, so what I'm seeing here is I can see that happening on the VR side. We're obviously seeing a lot more compute power on the desktop side, but also on the on many different sort of angles towards how I want to engage. And I think this is where we need to sort of look at ourselves and say, what is my way of engagement? Is it going to be in a physical sense most of the time, or is it going to be in an automated way in the future? And I think it'll be, I guess, a mix between both. Right now, we're all trying to sort of leverage what's possible and getting our gaze through that. But if you start to think of the applications, we're already seeing, in terms of health in the metaverse, the concepts around AR and how you can train surgeons across borders and sort of, be their shadows in many respects towards, training them and upskilling them. So I think there'll be a huge opportunity on the health side, huge opportunity on the education side. And I think this is where the real innovation is starting to happen with the various technologies that are coming through, whether it's on the headset side or others. And there's many different players there, but the compute power is what's bringing that to life. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that you actually focus on that computational capacity and where we're at. And I feel like all of those technologies that you've mentioned actually exist now. And so there's this phase at the moment where it's when do we adopt them as a business or as a government or as an individual, as opposed to do we? That's the big thing, especially with Web3. And I liken the transition from Web 1 to Web 2 to Web 3, where everyone thought, with the .com boom and bust, if you had a website that you were going to make a lot of money and do really well. And then they realized that they needed to add underlying value. And so the websites that added underlying value did really well. And then similar, everyone then needed social media as a business, and even governments needed to utilize social media. And then it was CRMs, and then a lot of data analytics and hyper-personalization for your customer experience. And we've been through all these phases and talking about NFTs now and FTs and how businesses actually adopt Web3. And for me, it's just a matter of when. So looking at technology adoption, and the general rule of thumb that we like to use is that technology is always 3 steps ahead of business application. So how do you have a look into the future at some of these technologies that are coming, and then choose the right time that's going to be economically right for your business and it's going to make a big impact? What is going to happen with those technologies now that are 2 to 3 steps ahead? So quantum computing, for one, definitely with the computational capacity, and some of these other technologies.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I shared a webinar about a week and a half ago on quantum computing and the metaverse, and it was interesting the applications around quantum computing that's possible versus what we currently have from a compute perspective. I think this is where it's really important to understand what's coming. So if we start to think about just cybersecurity as it is today, and how we currently secure networks using RSA technology and public key encryption. Today, with a standard computer as we are using today, whether it's a standard desktop, it would take upwards of around 300 trillion years to crack a public encryption key. However, with quantum computing, that changes. It gets down to 10 seconds. So you start to think about, okay, with this technology coming, how do I ready myself from a strategy perspective, whether I'm a banking financial institution, whether I'm a government institution or whatever, I've got to be ready for what's coming, but I've got to start to plan the skills in-house, but also within my economy to be ready to adopt these type of technologies. So if you start to think of the metaverse, it's around immersive experiences, digital ID, security and securing your ID credentials is going to be at the heart and soul of everything that you're going to bring in, because you would probably expect every economy that's going to be active in the Web3 economy space will have to have essentially every citizen and every resident with a digital ID opportunity to be present in the metaverse. And so what does that bring? Well, that brings other layers of policy, law and order. And so, you know, whether or not quantum safe protocol is embedded today in those frameworks, because you have to start considering what is that new protocol that's going to protect us, you know, online in that world. It has to have an element towards it. So whether today blockchain and the standard networks that we see don't currently embed quantum compute and quantum safe protocol into that infrastructure planning, that needs to be part of the layer 1, layer 2 strategies with whatever blockchain you bring in. And I think that's where the opportunity is for the public-private sector to become much more embedded, to work as a holistic, active ecosystem versus a passive, segregated ecosystem. And I think, you know, there's more push now towards, you know, multiverse, you know, metaverses, you know, or multi-chain, sorry, metaverses, and having the bridge, interconnecting that. But I think fundamentally, this is where the tech evolution that's coming, and quantum is one aspect of that, will help us realize what's possible. And it may happen quicker than what we actually think, because the quicker that evolution happens, is the quicker that industry is going to adopt it. So I can just see this sort of accelerating in the next 5 years, I would say. Yeah.
And so do you think that businesses and governments are ready for this? So let's just start with governments. What is the readiness of governments to have quantum secure encryptions or quantum secure environments at the moment? And then the same question for businesses and corporates.
I think it's learning. I mean, right now, I'll give you an example. The World Economic Forum was hosted back in May. When I looked at the whole agenda and I went through a number of the different dialogues there, I think I only saw one session that was talking specifically about quantum computing and what's coming. And I think what's happened is there are some governments out there, I mean, straight out of the bat, I mean, China is a world leader when it comes to quantum computer research, and that's sort of out there already from an existing spend perspective out of their budget. I don't think that has happened enough on a more global level. So what's starting to happen now is governments are starting to realize we need to be more active in investing in this space. So I'm starting to see that shift. It's much more verbal than real. But, you know, there are pockets. There are certainly pockets. I think Australia has made that clear now. I think with the new announcement with the new government, they've actually made a strategic play in the industry side to really target quantum computing. But I think when you start to look at the applications, that's more important. So the applications for me is, you know, the metaverse ecosystem itself and as an economy is where it's all going to be. And so, you know, quantum compute will play a role. There are some leading governments out there that are pushing the envelope on that side. And you know, I've been a part of, and I've actually brought together, you know, industry and government in Dubai. We actually created we call the Metaverse Majlis, which is a congregation of industry and government leaders and entities to get together and look at what are the policies, what are the key legal frameworks that we need to have in place to help us address the current challenges in the Web 2.0 space, but then be ready for Web 3.0. And I think we missed a bit of a trick with Web 2.0 because, you know, a lot of us gave up our data, not knowing obviously where and how that was being utilized. But now you fast track to Web 3, we have an opportunity to get that right. And, you know, having control of that is going to be critical. And so we've done that, you know, over there. We've created some insight reports on this. You know, we have a really direct dialogue with government. I think the government opportunity is to become much more readily engaged on all of these discussions, but also taking industry thought leadership, but specifically recommendations as potential adoption, and having a continuous working committee to work together to make that happen. So yeah.
That's incredible. And it's also scary and incredible. So from a consumer point of view and understanding where we're currently at the moment, I've been thinking that, well, maybe that security doesn't exist so much in some of our data, but to see that these Web3 applications are going to address a lot of that is quite promising.
Definitely.
Can I ask your white paper? You're co-authoring a white paper at the moment. Is it on this topic, and what are you exploring in that white paper?
Yeah, so this again was born out of last year. It's interesting. Out of the dialogue we did on AI and impact on society, my co-author, who's a head of Google research over at the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Government, John Lillywhite, we got together and we started to look at, well, we know what's coming. It's all about the metaverse, really. But the angle was, let's look at it from two ways. One is, what's the economic opportunity behind it, and how is AI going to play a role there? Because we all know that it's all around, fast tracking automation, being more productive, and the algorithms themselves are what predefines the code and everything else that comes with it. So we had these multiple discussions, and we ended up saying, let's create this white paper, Economics and AI in the Metaverse. So we did a first cut of this last year. We actually announced it at the blockchain summit in Dubai last September, and we had multiple sort of dialogues. We're now doing a full formal review process. We're going through that, and we looked at various aspects. One was the infrastructure behind the metaverse, the economy, and the gamification space, which builds upon it. In fact, that's what is really driving the behavioral shift of how we will engage in the Web3 space, but also specifically in the future internet, right? So we looked at that and dissected that in multiple layers. Obviously, the immersive environments, the VR environments, and various aspects behind that. The economic output opportunity as it relates to you as a human. So if I think of myself as a human today, my physical activity is being measured, whether it's in GDP or, consumer spend and everything else. But in the digital economy, there's only really one metric we will look at, which is really, what's the crypto markets looking at today? Is it $1 trillion? Is it half? Well, really, when you start to look at the metaverse ecosystem and that value, upwards of $13 trillion is the estimate that I think KPMG came out recently with their report as that economic opportunity. But when you look at Gen Z and you look at the spend that Gen Z is going to be having in this space, so we looked at, okay, the future spender and the future generation that's going to come in is going to be a creative generation. This was a generation that was born, Gen Z, after 1990 and upwards, I think, 2012. They're going to be, by some estimates, earning an income equivalent of about $33 trillion over the next 10 years. Where they're going to spend and invest that money, it's going to be online. And you would argue a big portion of that will be in the metaverse as the readiness of metaverse ecosystem accelerates. And so the white paper looks at many aspects there. And then the really key ingredient is around policy, law and order. And I sort of talked about it a little bit earlier, but you can't underestimate readiness around, I guess, how do you ensure that laws that are currently active in the physical sense are also playing a role in this world? And how do you protect the young consumers that are already in there, who are playing the Minecrafts and the Roblox and the Fortnites, and they suddenly become, having a historical footprint in the metaverse. So, you got to break it down. And then governance, is it a centralized government that will play that role? Is there a requirement to have inter-law applications across governments, much like what we have today with the UN and that charter? Do we need to have a similar thing for the metaverse, which ensures there is protection of consumer identity and rights and transactions that go through that? But then also, if there are virtual civil issues that are happening, and we've seen some of those, towards the end of last year, you had issues around assault that was happening in the metaverse, and there was actually a civil case that came through that. All of these attributes need to be discussed and sort of understood. And so we went through a lot of this, and now we're evolving it again because so much has changed in the last 6 months, and a lot of opportunities are coming through now. Government interaction, wanting to scale this, wanting to become much more real. I mean, if I give you one example of this, at the World Expo in Dubai, we had Accenture announce their global metaverse continuum, which is an enterprise metaverse play across education and health. We also had the Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority, a new establishment in the UAE, to essentially be present in the metaverse. So they're going to offer their first engagement with a government entity through the metaverse. So you start to think about all this. It's obviously quite exciting.
Yeah, I've got a lot of questions from what you've shared there, and I know that a lot of the big four in particular are creating products in this space, which is a very new shift from professional services and advice through to now actually products that they're offering. And I know Deloitte here in Australia have developed a digital twin of the sky of Australia with Air Services Australia as a partnership, and that technology is being able to offer that kind of service for people to utilize digital twins. And so I think about, I guess, impact and economic opportunity as one example. I love the quote that's only to impact 1 billion people. So 500 years ago, only kings and queens could impact 1 billion people. 100 years ago, it was the industrialists, and today it's you and me. And so if I look at what's measured maybe with GDP and my own personal stats at the moment that we can measure on humanity, my digital version and the digital impact that I can have is so significant now compared to what it was a number of years ago. And the example I like to give is that, a bank robber used to be able to rob a bank and walk away with as many bags of money as he can carry or put in a truck or a vehicle and drive away. And now someone could literally rob all the banks in the world overnight with maybe quantum computing, and that's an exponential villain. So if you think about the impact of that, that's going a little bit negative. But then if you look at the future impact of some of these generations that are coming and that they're building applications and this application layer, we can actually create ideas and things that can impact huge amounts of people, and the value that that creates is significant. I'd love to talk to you about some examples that we've seen with that. And I know there's one that I absolutely love is measuring biodiversity from space. So being able to understand if there's going to be a huge pest breakout and notifying farmers before the pests get to their farm, for example. Mm-hmm. So if you think about that, the impact that can then have is huge. The economic value of that is also huge, because if you think about the amount of crops that farmers lose due to pests, or even the first order, second order consequences where fertilizers and the sprays and the pesticides that are used on crops, there's a huge impact on the environment to that, but then there's also an impact, third order consequence on health of people that are actually consuming food that's been treated with a lot of pesticides. So there's a huge economic opportunity, and it's about to be available to everybody. What are some things that you're seeing that you're excited about?
Yeah, and I think I like the way you said it on value, because that economy and that internet layer is built on internet of value, right? Yeah. So how do you link the real world use cases? And if you take farming, I mean, obviously there's a natural requirement and I guess issue with climate change and what's going on with the impact around that's having on various farms. And we're seeing the obviously situation here in terms of Australia with that. The link to me is, how do you think about multiple angles around not just sustainable practices? Having a sustainable economy is the key, right? So if my economy relies on farming and that's a big part, I need to think about efficiencies and everything that comes with that. So what you just mentioned there is, yes, from space, technically you can utilize those tools and those various satellite technologies that we have now, which is providing various assessments on just weather patterns that are happening and getting us ready for that. But where I'm seeing, I think the opportunity here is beyond just the physical opportunity. I think when I start to think about, if a farmer today is certainly farming and relying upon fertilizers that are coming in the supply chain, for example, how do you predict where and how quickly availability for the fertilizer is going to be there? And can you source from multiple channels in a virtual sense as much as a physical sense? So predictive analytics is going to be the key behind all of this, because what we're seeing here is that the challenges that we're facing is related a lot towards supply chain. And a lot of that is actually forward-thinking predictive analytics and, forward-thinking weather pattern changes that are happening. And so if you start to think about how you implement AI in that world, and you're seeing Microsoft doing a lot of work there, for example, and some of the big tech. But then if I think about, I'm just an operator, I'm just a farm, I'm sitting on my farm in a way where I'm relying and dependent on the weather, but I'm more reliant on the supply chain to allow me to grow my produce, but then to export that in a profitable way. So can I be rewarded for that in a token economic model potentially? So maybe there is a certain DAO organization that gets set up where maybe farmers are all participants in this DAO, and then that ends up channeling new investment that supports them, during the lean period, but also helps them grow and accelerate investment during the scale period. And I think that's where you got to think differently from an economic opportunity model. We hear a lot about play to earn and these areas, but maybe concepts around grow to earn may end up coming, or whatever it may be, right? But you're providing value to that physical entity, and in this case an enterprise entity, which is in the farming space, back up the chain. So there could be opportunities there.
I absolutely love this. And if we stay on the farmer example for a little bit, so, we are talking about humanity and what humans will need. And so I'm an investor in Hillridge Technologies, which are doing parametric weather insurance for farmers. And so the old way is that a weather event happens, like a hurricane or something, that wipes out a farmer's crops, and then an assessor comes out within 3 months and then may pay them some money. And in that time frame, in a lot of developing nations, they've probably lost their livelihood. And so for parametric weather insurance, we're setting parameters. If this weather event happens, or if the temperature goes above a certain degrees or below a certain degrees for an agreed amount of time, the insurance automatically pays same day. And so, these are kind of those remove the friction from the process things. And, I'm seeing another technology that is actually paying people for growing trees. And so you can actually get certain amount of credits and to host and have more trees. So I think those kind of applications, it always comes back to humanity. And our topic here is really about humanity and the metaverse. And I love the linkage to businesses. And if you're actually solving a challenge for humans, then you're going to be adding value, whether it's people or planet. So environmental solutions are very valuable as well. So people or planet, then you're going to be able to do well. And I love just encouraging people, and for any of those out there that are watching today, think about your business model and who are you adding value to? And if I look at the pandemic and with COVID and the businesses that did really well and the businesses that didn't do so well, it was so polarized, and there was almost like a pre-COVID business model and a post-COVID business model, and some people had already been prepared and had a lot more online availability. But the ones that did well was providing services, food, shelter, water, anything that was what humans actually need. So how do we actually help businesses shift towards supporting that framework? And I know there's a lot of ESGs and there's a lot of reporting coming around it, but what's your views on what that humanity impact is?
Yeah, it's really interesting because, again, go back to the World Economic Forum, there's a lot of objectives towards measuring ESG goals and making sure that there are accountabilities across the board, whether it's private sector or even government driven. So I think one thing for certain is that when we're thinking of the future economy, you got to think about how do you take skills and upskill what we've currently got out there and bring it into this new world. And then that new world is really around a digital footprint across whichever segment and whatever industry. So in terms of having a sustainable goal and objective behind that, and something that has diversity fully included in terms of economic diversity, but also talent diversity, and then, you know, I guess the makeup of the approach towards that. You know, what we're seeing if I just take the gamification space, the players in the gamification space today are young kids. You know, so you could argue that we don't measure that kind of talent in terms of the current economic assessments that we do. So, and a lot of them are in their, you know, early teens, and I've got some kids, so I know they're in that space. They're using my credit card to buy and do things. But to bring up society and bring up some of these emerging markets into this new area, we need to be ready for them to engage through infrastructure readiness and also through digital literacy initiatives. So once you start to work on that, either as a corporation, which is helping your existing workforce transition towards this, but as a government and as a society, making sure that's imprinted throughout the education curriculum, but also opportunities at a young age to be engaged and to develop, that will help the whole ESG model accelerate, because the creativity comes out of this. You know, you can't create unless you have some kind of a background of intellect on that. And I think this is where globally the economies are going to shift. So what's going to happen is some economies in the emerging markets will just supersede and accelerate. And you're seeing that with mobile penetration. If you think of in Africa, for example, very strong mobile penetration, very strong innovation around the mobile tech. And that's because of the need that they went from no connectivity to, you know, high bandwidth mobile connectivity, and have been able to innovate around that. Same will apply in terms of what the metaverse ecosystem will bring, because that is the opportunity to merge and accelerate ESG objectives, because you can apply various models. And we spoke a little bit about token economics, where you're also looking at the experience side. Well, to me, if you merge those two, learning will completely change. And the ability to accelerate learning will put some pressure on, you know, how much time do you physically need to spend in a certain course curriculum. You may want to accelerate that into a shortened bite-sized version, but then you're gaining the rest through immersive learning and immersive experiences in this sort of area. So I think the ESG opportunity is accelerated on the literacy side and on the readiness side from an infrastructure. You merge those two, that's where most of the, I think, focus should be. So if I was a corporation, I'd be thinking about that right now. If I was a government, I'd be accelerating the ecosystem to work together to drive that.
Incredible. I know in UNICEF are actually working with the GigaConnect project, and that is just measuring real-time internet connectivity across, I think, 5 million schools now to be able to help with that. And it's incredible just the way that some of these kids are actually already operating. And so it's not been that long that they've had mobile phones, but they actually trade in phone credit. And so they're actually seeing that they're actually digitally sharing, you know, phone credit, and they probably won't ever go through this physical money phase that we have. And they're already operating on that digital first front. And I kind of look at those economies with 1 billion people in population. So you've got Asia, you've got Africa, you've got India, and they've typically not all been online. And there's something like 5 billion people in developing nations and about 3 billion-ish in developed nations. And so do you feel like we're ready for those 5 billion new minds all being online at the fastest internet speeds that we've ever had, and in this digital world, and adding digital value? I'm
passionate about, I mean, look, I've looked after emerging markets in multiple lives. So, and that was from Dubai, but accessing Eastern Europe, Middle East and Africa, and West Asia in broader sense. So I've actually touched all those areas there. And one thing I will say is the demographic is so young. And when they're young, it means that they're creative by nature, right? So the opportunity for them is going to accelerate. Infrastructure investment is accelerating already. So you're seeing, for example, I'm going to give you some examples. If you look at Egypt, for example, it's 90% financially excluded as an economy, where they're not online. But when that 90% of that population comes online, and there's a big government initiative to drive that, you're going to see a massive talent, innovative push. And they've got a very talented society there, but they're going to be, for I guess, North Africa and most of Middle East, the India of that region. We're seeing, obviously, Eastern Europe, a lot of innovation that's come out of there. If you look at the fintech and the crypto space, massive shifts have happened in Eastern Europe, but also in broader Africa. So are we ready for that 5 billion to come along? I will say this, is that if you are not engaging with that economy right now and helping them in transitioning, you're going to miss a huge opportunity to, A, be part of something quite unique, but also, I think, accelerate the transition towards digital in multiple industries. And that's where, whether it's sustainable energy practices, I mean, obviously, yes, in the Middle East, there's some big moves towards sustainable energy, whether it's in solar and others, but the same applies in Africa, the same applies in Asia. And I think if you look at the COVID pandemic that we went through, it's everyone's least favorite word, but at the end of the day, some economies or some pockets of economies were dependent on the online connectivity. And in some cases, concepts around play to earn were feeding families, right? Whether it was, people playing some of these gamification games like Axie Infinity and earning an income through that. So you had young parts of that population, sustaining.
Looking after their family.
Exactly. So that could potentially play out. And I think if I'm a corporate or an employee anywhere, there needs to be opportunities to what I call have a portfolio approach to what you do. So whether I'm working a full-time job with a primary sponsored employer, I need to also think about how am I getting the best value by being engaged with the ecosystem and bringing that back in. So I would be allocating some time for my team, wherever that may be, to not just spend 5 days a week online on my sort of in my area and with my business, maybe spend 1 or 2 days immersed in the ecosystem, bring and reinfuse that back into my business. And if, whether it's in government or corporate, and then together that becomes much more of an opportunity to accelerate that transition.
I have to ask you, as an add-on to that, I guess it's the ability to utilize DAOs to be able to create communities and a lot more impact. And so if you actually think about how the finances were distributed in the past and it was very centralized and controlled, now that we've got this ability to utilize technology like a DAO to have voting systems and get people to all have a say in whatever a challenge might be, how will you see that playing out? And, will these developing nations adopt it way quicker than some of the developed nations?
I think you're going to find stronger support where regulation has sort of allowed that to be. So what's happening here is you're seeing in a lot of these developing nations, the intent is there. So the intent is there that, some examples is they want to be global nerve centers for Web3 innovation, which is great. But centered to that is the DAO, the decentralized autonomous organizational approach, which doesn't always fit the narrative of centralized government approach, right? But if you take some countries, I won't name them, but if you look at some of the countries out there that have had centralized government approaches, it was the market transition that naturally, organically happened in the capital markets that accelerated their economies. And so you would be crazy not to embrace the DAO strategy in key industries where the regulatory framework and arbitrage has been set. So I think DAOs are going to play a pivotal role. I mean, even the structure of an organization with boards and shareholding, that'll all change in this space if it's adopted in certain business units, I would say. And I think that's where the good opportunity is to start it off in certain business opportunities or new product opportunities that are going to be born in the Web3 space and start to evolve in that way. And then as you take the learnings through, there are pros and cons with DAOs, right? So you've got the shift where everyone's pushing in the DAO towards a certain objective, and then maybe investments and maybe a pivot of the product or the feature. It may not always be the right one. So there needs to be some governance application towards it. But at the end of the day, ultimately, it's the community that's driving that forward. And so as long as the the real world knowledge of who are those actors in there is known, and the digital ID is at least reflective of the real community. I think it's going to certainly be adopted.
Yeah, I want to oversimplify it just for a little bit, and just the mechanics of how I see it working. And I guess the regulatory environment is about timing. And I think the timing is, in 10 years' time, we won't be having this conversation, and whatever that timing may be. And so, how do you test a decentralized autonomous organization, or even just a DAO in a super simple way, just to get familiar with it within organizations? And so I've likened it in the past of, imagine the social club in a corporation. And so, there was a certain amount of money that was contributed from payroll, typically, that went into a pool of funds, and then you had a committee that decided how to spend that funds. So being able to create a rule set that from the very beginning would last and create a equitable and an actual positive, and get the impact that you desire from having that DAO is quite fascinating. So, how do companies kind of test with some small things like that, and, maybe within internal team members and allocating some funds? I've seen it happen a lot in communities. So On-Chain Monkey, as an example, has a DAO where a percentage of any of their NFTs traded goes to a DAO, and then the community can propose where some funds get spent, and then the rest of the community vote on it, and then it's all automatically done. And there's a whole heap of things that we're testing, and I'm loving seeing the progress of things that come up to be able to really get it right. So what are some small steps that people can take in this space, do you think?
Yeah, I think firstly, if you think of adopting in an innovation practice, what has all that been historically? It's always been some chief innovation person that's trying to drive a holistic change across the board. I think the DAO opportunity is to accelerate that in a defined group. So you need to invite and have participants that represent every corner of that organization. And I think once you start with that and that representation, you start then the opportunity, which is really what is it that you are looking to solve for? What is that problem that you're looking to address? Is it a funding issue? Is it a new market, product creation? You need to start with representation. Once you have the representation in there, the DAO on its own as a group needs to be empowered. And so if it's started off as a simple analogy, as a sandbox within the organization, and you can look at all of the learnings that come through that, you would start to then grow from there. So I would apply this as essentially an internal sandbox. And it should be really part of every organization. Because if you don't do it now, you're not going to be ready when industry starts to shift. You don't want to be that Kodak company, right? Yeah. When that transition happened. So you want to be ready for it. But yeah, that's a very small approach. Just get representation, representing everybody, putting them together into a sandbox environment which has empowerment to do what they need to be able to do, and maybe allocate certain funding to test it. So you go through that, that allocation, and if it succeeded, then you just accelerate from there. It's baby steps approach.
Yeah, I love that, and I love the concept even of the 1% pledge. And how do you actually start with small pockets of money? Because I think where there's finances allocated, then where focus goes, energy flows, and I think that can have a huge impact. So
absolutely.
Very cool. I've got a few more questions for you. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you'd like to see solved with technology?
I think when I think of tech, it's an enabler for everything. So look, financial literacy is a big one. I think if you're digitally excluded from the economy, you're not active in the economy. So access should be a human right to the internet, right? Digital finance should be a human right. Mobility access should be a human right. These are sort of core needs that technology can solve for right now. And I think they're human rights as well. So, you can't participate in an economy if you're not online. And you can't be contributing to what needs to come later if you're not able to do that in a meaningful way. Also, technology can accelerate the support structures that can help you remain active and growing in that economy. So whether it's new literacy opportunities, obviously in terms of training and learning and skills upgrade, all of that relies on tech. So to me, that's where I'd like to see tech absolutely prioritized and focused. In the emerging markets, you're starting to see a lot more of that. I think in the developed markets, it's all around continuous innovation, and then leveraging that innovation with the developing markets.
I love you mentioned earlier just about the breaking down education and courses into small little bites, and it's almost like just-in-time education, and whether that be for whatever challenge you're having. So even if it's DAOs and within your organization, what are those just-in-time education pieces that you need to implement into your internal training or whatever it may be?
Totally.
Very cool. So I have to ask you a big picture vision of the future. So the question is, it's the year 2042, it's 20 years into the future. What does the world look like? You've just woken up and all of these things are now implemented. What are the problems that have been solved? And
day in the life of Karl. 2042. So I wake up and I go to let's just say to my bathroom, and I'm going to go brush my teeth. There's already a digital screen there. It's given me a dashboard view of what my avatar did in the metaverse. That dashboard view could be, your avatar, because you have an interest in digital art and in digital land in certain cities, and certain NFT collectibles with certain sports teams that I follow. It went out and it did those various acquisitions. It invested for me in certain digital assets. But it also gave me a view of what's coming from a transition and trends perspective in key. So that to me is where I wake up and I see that. Now I have the opportunity to either physically go and traverse that metaverse for the hour leading into me turning up online at the office, not physically. But I'm only spending really a couple of hours doing that in a physical sense. The rest of my time physically is doing what I like and enjoy. The rest of the time, my avatar is working for me. What I envision is our avatars will be our employer, will be our workforce. And I think ultimately, I would love to see that as what the future holds, because then we can go and embrace nature and everything that we want to do in the physical sense. So we should have that kind of separation, but that separation will flip. Today, 80% of our time is at physical work. I think I'd love to see that reverse. Yes, maybe I'll do physical work because I enjoy it. And what I really want to do is potentially continue to learn. So I imagine that will be the future world. Yeah, I'm not going to bring in space. I think we know potentially space might play a role. But I will say that would be for me where I would see the future economy and also just us as people. I may attend, like I said, some sports events virtually. I follow rugby league. I follow the Premier League as well. So I may choose just to watch multiple games virtually. I may be rewarded through that process, which is already existing today. But then if quantum does accelerate some of that, who knows, we may be transported physically to go be there. But to me, that's where the real opportunity is, having an economic driver for us personally that does everything that we need, and we would then allocate our time, with friends and family, and we want to do it. Yeah.
Sounds like a very cool world to be living in. Are there any closing thoughts or things that you'd like to share with our audience?
I think, continuous learning is sort of on everyone's minds today. You've got to really embrace change. We do all go through this narrative. I've happened to be an expat for about 16 years, so I've spent a lot of time overseas, but I think what's coming is what's exciting, and that's going to revolve around new change in various sectors. I think embrace change, pivot daily, and have an innovation mindset in everything that you do. Carry that through, because you're always going to solve problems. And whether you're a marketeer, or whether you're an engineer, or whether you're an accountant, or whether you're a CEO, the concept of the DAO, the concept behind that, is bringing everyone together with a shared objective to drive things forward collectively, I think that's really important. And I think that's what I'd be absolutely advising everyone, just to get out there and don't sit back, right? Like I said to you, even if you're working with a full-time job, embrace yourself and immerse yourself, within, some really exciting startups or some really exciting areas which are evolving, and just get your hands involved with that and go for it.
We really are living in one of the most exciting times ever to be alive. And I think there's so many challenges and there's so many opportunities from those challenges. And so thank you so much for sharing your thoughts today on your global view on the metaverse, Web3, the broad digital economy, and also a huge thank you to Work Club for having us for this conversation here. I do have to share the view because we have the Opera House there, we have the Harbour Bridge just there. We are in the George Street location that's just opened here.
That's real. That's not digital.
It's totally real. We couldn't quite get the lighting to work to have it in the background for the full conversation this morning, but we are loving Work Club. So thank you, Work Club. Thank you, Karl, so much for having this conversation and sharing your thoughts with our audience.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.